time. Boys and girls, if you'd like to go at the back for Sunday school, please do so. Teenagers, you stay here. It's interesting this morning that I've decided some time ago that I was going to start a new series on Does God Care? And I just happened to watch Michael Youssef, and guess what he preached on this morning? Habakkuk. But he did the whole lot. I'm only going to give you a little bit by little bit. But the thought is, in chapter 1, does God care? And we're only going to look at 4 verses this morning. But does God care? Now, we've celebrated, last week was Christmas Day. And the question was, and the sermon was, when God speaks, who listens? And it was God declaring, I am here. Emmanuel. God is with us to show us the way to God. And looking at Habakkuk, he asked a lot of questions that we probably ask ourselves when it comes to God. But it challenges us, what do we really understand and believe about God and the way he works? Because if you're like me, I like everything in a box, you know? This box over here has got this in it. This box over here has got this in it. This box, this box, this box. I know where to go to get what I want when I want it. And sometimes we like to treat or think of God in the same way. We put him in a box. And when we need him, pull him out of the box. When we finish, we put him back in the box. I don't need him anymore. And when things happen in our lives, oh, where's my God box? Where did I put God? I better go pull him out just for this time. And of course, when things don't work out or things don't happen, well, what's the point? God, where are you? Why aren't you doing something? I pray to you, and what happens? Nothing. Nothing. Well, Habakkuk asked 3 questions. God, do you care? Why don't you do something? And I've often asked myself, and I know there is a few others, God, if you're real, if you really care about us and this world, why don't you step in and do something? All the things that are going on in this world, you're God. You can do anything. Why don't you step in and do something? Chapter 2, God, that isn't fair. How could you do such a thing? And chapter 3, God, are you there? Do you really exist? And that's what we're going to look at for a number of weeks. As we travel for life, there's always going to be difficulties and problems that are far beyond our control. We just don't expect them. And when they do come, I run out of plan A, B, C, D, E. I just can't do anything. I'm stuck. And how we respond to these challenges will tell us a great deal about our faith in the things that we trust and in our attitude to life. God wants us to be aware of what's happening around us. But you know what? He's also said, don't worry about it. Now, that's very difficult as human beings. We see problems, we see difficulties, not to get worried about it. God says, don't worry. Don't worry. He has the situation in hand. He hasn't abandoned us. He hasn't, if you like, gone AWOL on us when things get tough. He uses these opportunities to reveal himself both to you and me and also to the world in which we live. All these difficulties, all these problems will challenge our faith. It'll challenge us from the perspective, is God in control? Is he really in control? Has he really got a handle on what's happening around the world and especially to me at this present moment. If he's so powerful and he's so good, why does he allow evil, why does he allow violence to happen in our world? Where is God? Why doesn't he do something? These questions were asked by the prophet Habakkuk. And God exposes many of the misconceptions and misunderstandings about who he is and what he does. And I don't believe that it has changed throughout the millennia. We're still asking the same questions. We still have the same misconceptions and misunderstandings when it comes to God. And the first thing challenged me was this as I prepared: a plea against perceived indifference in verses 1 and 2. Now, how easy as human beings is it for people to misunderstand something we've said or something we do? How easy is it? It's pretty easy, isn't it? Someone can misunderstand or take the wrong idea or make the wrong assumption by something we say or something we do. And how do you feel about it when you're on the receiving end of some misconception or misunderstanding from somebody? Is it nice? Do you say, give me more? I love it? Or what do you do? How do you respond to that misunderstanding? Shut up shop? Have nothing to do with them? It's their problem, not mine. How do we deal with it? It's very easy to be misunderstood by others. And as human beings, we have this, I guess, we are very quick to make judgments regarding the views of other people, the opinions and ideas, and the actions of other people. If we see something that we believe is wrong, bang, we make a judgment. Don't have anything to do with that person. Did you see what they said or what they did? And we make a judgment. We even do this when they remain silent, when they don't respond to our questions. And that's easy. If I have anything to do with the media, I'll say nothing, simply because I don't trust the media. But that then is also a judgment against you, because we have this tendency, once we've made a decision, we become judge, jury, and executioner of that person. We've made a decision. And yet, we don't know the full facts. We haven't seen all the evidence provided to make our judgments. And of course, it's very sad when you're on the receiving end of being misunderstood. And the same thing applies when it comes to God. How sad he must be when people's assumptions and misconceptions about who he is and what he does come to light. You know, it's not easy. And God doesn't feel any worse than we do. It's easy to forget we're sinful and selfish people. God gives us warnings along the way. And we assume, hey, that doesn't apply to me. I've got a special exemption. I often hear people say, Pastor, don't worry about that. God and me have got an agreement. And I think to myself, really? Why is that? I'm special. I'm one of his. So I've got a special agreement. He lets me do what I want. I let him do his own thing. I thought, really? But some people have that concept about God. They really do. And yet God gives warnings for us as well. And we think, hey, it doesn't apply to me. Those things apply to other people. I'm immune from it. We believe that God should respond quickly, that God should do something when wrong things are done by others, particularly those who reject him, those who resist him. We think, God, why don't you send a lightning bolt down and hit that person? Why don't you give them what they need? You know, how dare they reject you? How dare they do these things? Why don't you do something? But you know, when it comes to us and what we do, we think, God will just look a different way. He won't give us what we deserve. We think we have this sense of entitlement because sometimes our concept of God is we see him as our sugar daddy. Let me explain that. Does everyone know what a sugar daddy is? He's there to give me what I want. Whenever I ask, whatever I ask, what is God there for? To give me whatever I want. And some people's concepts, some Christians' concepts, God is their sugar daddy, gives us everything we want. And of course, we're not prepared if our sugar daddy says, no, you're not getting it. How dare you say that? We think we're entitled. And when things don't go according to our expectations, what do? I've seen this many times in the supermarket, where you see a child wants a chocolate or a drink, and their parent says, no, you can't have it. So what does the child do? Child meekly accepts, yes, mum, yes, dad, whatever, I agree, I'll conform. Or what do? They chuck the biggest tantrum that they can so that their parents will say, oh, here it is, shut up. And they'll get what they want. And we'll laugh at that and say, how did that child get away with that? Yet, spiritually, are we any different when it comes to God? God, I want this, I want that. You're not getting it. Why? Why can't I have it? We chuck a wobbly. And of course, we give God an earful of our grievances to make sure that he knows we're not happy about our situations. And we expect that he will do his thing and do something about our situation. Our perception, our understanding of God then becomes one of frustration. When he fails to act according to our wishes, when he fails to remove the difficulties we're in, and we wonder, why doesn't he do something? Does he really care about me and what's happening? Why is he indifferent? Why doesn't he answer me when I ask him? Same questions that Habakkuk asked God. Same questions. We look at the prophet. This is the message Habakkuk the prophet received. Now, what do we know about Habakkuk? What do you know about Habakkuk? Anything? It seems that he'd been around for a while, but we don't know where he came from. But some things that we do know about this man. His name in Hebrew means embracer or wrestler. Some suggest by the tone of his letter, he was a man who wrestled with God over the questions of life. Others have suggested he was a man who embraced by God to love God's people and provide them with comfort during difficult times. We know, it seems, he was well educated. It appears he was the music director for the temple orchestra. And I have read that it would believe that this whole letter, chapters 1, 2 and 3, was written to music and sung to the people. Now, I looked through these 3 chapters and I don't know how they would put that to music, but somehow they did. They put the whole message to music. He grew up in Judah during the reign of King Josiah, who undertook a religious reformation in the nation, where he influenced many to return to the Lord. When Josiah died on the battlefield against Pharaoh Necho, his successor Jehoiakim turned the nation into a cesspool of morality, immorality, and rebellion against God. In other words, the nation turned its back on God. And there were difficult times ahead for those who were true believers. You know, when things are going tough, economically, spiritually, financially, it's hard to remain positive about the future. And we can become very disillusioned about life and future prospects. It gets us down in the dumps. And everything that we once knew, everything that we once had, has changed. And it's very hard to not get caught up by being depressed. This letter or message was a burden to Habakkuk. And it was a burden because it predicted future judgment that was coming to Judah. Habakkuk was given this message. It was his burden to bear. It was his responsibility that God gave him to make sure that the people heard what God was saying and that the people understood that message. Now, Habakkuk's problem was he could see the situation for what it was, while everybody else in the population chose to remain ignorant. They were not aware of what was happening around them, or they chose not to rock the boat. They chose not to rattle the cages of those in power for fear of making the situation worse. So they remained, if you like, the silent majority, putting up with whatever was happening. Habakkuk carried the burden of seeing things for what they were. His responsibility, you go and tell the people the message regarding the issues of life, whether they want to hear them or not. In other words, it became such a burden that he couldn't restrict himself or be contained. He just had to let the people know what God's message was. This was a vision given to him by God. He was able to see things. He was able to see people as they were. He was able to see judgment was coming upon the nation. And if people didn't repent, then there was going to be big problems for the nation. But he could see the sins of individuals as well as the nation. In other words, those who were in power. He could see all the wrongdoings. And this message, this became a burden for him. He had a truth to tell people that wouldn't be good. And he starts the perception, Lord, how long must I ask for help and you ignore me? I cry out to you about violence, but you do not save us. Now, it's not easy for a prophet to declare a message to people that they don't want to hear. And I guess he was praying that if he delivered this message, that somehow the people would repent and God would come and deliver them. So he prayed more earnestly. And the more that he prayed, the more silent God became, or it appeared. So it was frustrating. Here he was, going before Almighty God as his prophet, asking the wise and getting no response. How frustrating would that be? He was God's prophet. You would think he'd have some pull. And that's what I find interesting, because people say, Pastor, pray for me. I said, why can't you pray yourself? Oh, you've got more pull than I have. Really? It's the same God. I'm just one person. He's your God as well as he's mine. We have the same connection. We have the same ability to go to God in prayer with our requests. The nation's in need. He's a prophet. He's in need. And yet he can't get a response from God. No answer to what is God doing. Why doesn't he do something or say something about these things? And that's where the challenge comes. Does God really care what's happening to me or the world in which I live? Habakkuk had a problem about God's being. He had a problem about God's character. And he was trying to understand the things that were happening at the time in Judah with the way he believed God should act or respond. Now, make no mistake, he knew God, but he had misconceptions about what he thought God should be doing at that time for the people. He could see, yes, that's the problem. God, step in and fix it. Yep, she'll be right. You can do something, God. Step in and do it. And yet, where was God? AWOL. Or so he thought. And I think sometimes you and I have got the same misconceptions about God. We get in trouble. God, help me. Hop. Where are you? Why don't you answer? Make no mistake, Habakkuk knew the nation had turned their backs on God. They'd given themselves over to pursuing false idols that would satisfy their desires and appetites. Yet in his own mind, he's trying to reconcile with himself, how could God, who is sovereign and in control of everything, possibly tolerate and allow these things to happen if he's really God? Was he real? Why was he silent? Why didn't God answer his prayer right away? He saw the violence in Judah. It was an everyday occurrence. It had become a way of life for the people of Judah, if you like. It was the new norm. It was a great reset, if you like, they were willing to embrace for a so-called better future without the need for God. And I wonder if we're any different. Think about it. Murder, rapes, muggings, domestic violence and civil disobedience were everywhere to be seen where you looked in Judah. Now, we live in Darwin, but this would apply to any place in the world and in Australia. You look, the rapes, the murder, the muggings, the domestic violence, the civil disobedience, everywhere you look, it's there. And Judah wasn't a place you felt safe or secure in. You locked yourself in. You took steps to protect yourself from the violence that was being perpetuated on the nation and its citizens. If you like, history was being rewritten by those in charge. Things that they didn't like or agree with were being cancelled and done away with, or they were obstacles to where the nation was being taken. Does it sound familiar? If we're aware and looking at what's happening in our nation and in our world, that's exactly what's happening. We've been taking in a different direction. Where was God in all of this? What was God doing about this situation? It seemed to Habakkuk God was indifferent to these things, meaning that he couldn't care less about them. He remained silent. And so Habakkuk wrestled with the doubt, does God answer prayer? Does he really care about the suffering of human beings? Was he really in charge of things? How many times do we ask ourselves the same question? Now Habakkuk provides some insights into his struggle. He knew where to take his complaints and his doubts. He took them straight to God. He didn't seek the counsel of other prophets or theologians. He went straight to God and he poured out his anguish to him to show him how to reconcile what he saw was happening to what he believed that God should be doing. And often that's what we do. We see things in our society that are wrong. We have a God that we believe in and we're saying, God, show me how you can solve and reconcile these things and make them better. Now, just like Habakkuk, we think we've got the solution. We really do. We just want God to rubber stamp it. You see, Habakkuk thought all God needed to do was get rid of Jehoiakim the king, replace him with a good king who would lead people in the right direction, and the problem would be solved. That's his solution. Get rid of the bad king, replace him with a good king, the people will follow, and everything will be fine again. Now, I would say I've thought the same thing. Get rid of the government we've got and replace them with a good government and things will be okay, right? God, why don't you do that? Well, God hasn't done that. He's allowed the people to vote what sort of government that they want to follow. But Habakkuk thought he had the problem solved. He could see this is what the problem was. This is what needed to be done. If I can see it, God, why can't you? Easy. Why don't you do something? You see, Habakkuk was looking at the problems. He wasn't looking at God. He was in a bad situation. Things were difficult. That's what he saw. He starts with God isn't listening to me. If God was listening to me, he would do something. That tells me God doesn't care. We do the same thing. Why aren't you listening, God? Why aren't you doing something? Don't you care? When things aren't going like they should, you and I are quick to let God know it. And the problem begins because God doesn't seem to want to hear what I have to say. Habakkuk had prayed to God about the mess that he saw. And he asked God, how long do I have to cry out for help before you listen? How many times do I have to yell, scream, help, murder, police before you come to the rescue? God, you aren't looking at what's going on. Not only is God not listening to what I have to say, but he isn't seeing things the way that I do. He must have turned a blind eye to what is happening and doesn't want to get himself involved. You and I are no different. And we begin to ask, where is God when I need him? Why doesn't he answer my prayers when I ask him? Now, I've compiled a lot of questions that people have had about God not answering prayers. And they cover a multitude of things. Times that have been difficult and people have prayed to God for such things. A godly mother prays for her wayward son. He was raised in the church. He went to Sunday school. He knows the Bible. When we left home, he left it all behind. For many years his mother has prayed for him, but to this day he remains a wayward son. A wife prays for a husband who left her after so many years of marriage for a younger woman. He seems utterly unreachable, and the marriage heads swiftly for divorce. A husband prays for his wife who has terminal cancer. She has 6, maybe 7 months to live. There are no treatments to stop the cancer. The elders of the church anoint her with oil, pray over her in the name of the Lord. She dies 5 months later. A young man prays fervently for deliverance from an overpowering temptation. The struggle never seems to end. The more he prays, the worse the temptation becomes. Or you as a parent have prayed with confidence for the healing of someone, believing they would be healed, and they didn't. Lord, where are you? Why don't you do something about this? I don't like the answer that I got. You applied for university, for your dreams, but they said no. You were interviewed for a new job. They found somebody else. You asked God for healing, but the doctor says the chemo didn't work. You prayed for God to find a husband, and you're still waiting. You asked a young woman to marry you. She said no. You put your life savings into a new business only to see it fail within a year. You moved interstate to take on a new job. It didn't work out. Now you're unemployed. You never intended to end up divorced, but here you are. You planned on having more children, but it isn't happening. You volunteered to serve on the worship team. They said get back to you and you're still waiting. What do you do when God doesn't seem to live up to your expectations? How do you respond to the Lord when he doesn't answer the way you wanted? Habakkuk was troubled by something that troubles all of us. He couldn't reconcile his view of God with all the injustice that was happening around him. And you and I will encounter problems in life we can't understand. There will be times of sorrow that we cannot cope with. There will be times of temptations we'll experience that will lead to doubting God. Or for that matter, whether we're Christians in the first place, we will wonder, does God really care at all if the faith we have is not enough for us? And Satan tempts us to doubt God in order to undermine our faith. He tempts us to believe we're fools for believing in God, a God that he says doesn't exist and has no power to do anything. And we come to a point in our lives where we say, God, I can't figure out why things are happening the way they are if you are who you say you are and you're not doing what I think you're supposed to do. Habakkuk is praying something like this. God, your people are in a real mess. I've been constantly asking you to change things, to do something about it. I've done this on many occasions, and what do? Nothing. You do not answer. You do not respond. You do not care. People would often ask, how can God let the world in which we live get in such a mess if he's in charge? How can he let the church, of all things, get in the mess it is today? Why is there war and famine and suffering, sorrow, disease, death in the world? Why doesn't God do something? Why is he so inactive? Let me say this. God doesn't think the way we do. Neither does he do things the way we do. God works in mysterious ways he's wonders to perform. From a text point of view, it's strange that God chooses to remain silent in difficult circumstances. And we must ask ourselves, why God? Why did God let Israel get to this point in time? Why did he let his people go so far? Why didn't God just step in and smash the idols right where they were put up? Why did he allow the false prophets to get in? Why didn't he strike them down on the spot? When it comes to the church, why has God let liberalism come into the church? Why does he allow it to progress? Why doesn't he take away the false teachers, strike them dead on the spot? Why does God allow so many wrong things to be done if he really is God? And the way that God answers is not always the way that we expect it to be. For Habakkuk, as we'll find out next week, it's going to be answered, but not in the way he expected or wanted. A plea against perceived insensitivity. Habakkuk looks at the problem and sees it without understanding the way that God sees it. It might be a surprise, but life doesn't always work out exactly the way we want it to work. So we shouldn't be surprised when things don't work out. And the reason is, if we're honest, we like to be in control of things, don't we? Don't we like to be in control? That I can map out my day. I can map out my whole month. I can map out my whole year. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going away in 3 months' time. I'm going to do this in 4 months' time. I'm going to do this in 6 months' time. I'm going to get married on such and such a date. We've got it all planned out. I'm going to have a baby on such and such. We've got it all under control. And what happens when it doesn't? We get upset. Because we had it all worked out. We might have considered every situation in life that might happen to us. We might have taken steps to ensure bad things don't happen to us. But certainly when things don't turn out the way we want, we get frustrated and upset. And we allow ourselves to become victims over our circumstances rather than victors over them, because we haven't got the right response to them. So here Habakkuk continues his complaint, accusing God of being insensitive to the needs of his people by doing nothing. And he concludes that God is not doing his job, because if he was, these things wouldn't happen. How many times have we thought that? If you're doing your job, this wouldn't have happened, God. And the assumption. Why do you make me see wrong things and make me look at trouble? People are destroying things and hurting others in front of me. They're arguing and fighting. So this question challenges God's motive. Why don't you do something? Why are you inactive? He focuses on what he sees. And what he sees is the injustice. He sees the falsehood. He sees the idolatry. He sees the fighting and the arguing. That's what he sees. He maybe is thinking, if you are who you are, you say you are, you have the power to do whatever you want, why don't you do something about all these wrong things that are happening to your people? You either have the power to do and change things, or you don't care. Both of these are wrong assumptions. God does care. He does have the power, but he also has a plan and purpose. He will use the difficulties in life as an opportunity to show and reveal himself and demonstrate who he is. There's a big question. So the teachings are weak, the justice never comes, evil people gain while good people lose. The judges no longer make fair decisions. Now, just remind me, how long ago was this letter written? Isn't that the complaint that you and I have today? You know, there's injustices. We see the courts, people going before the courts, and they're let off. And we say, what is the purpose of taking them to court? I become the person that's victimised rather than the person who's done something. And we say, it's mad. It doesn't make sense. But Habakkuk asks the same question. Why do you allow me to see all these things, God? I'm not blind. I can see them. I can see everything. And it's getting worse. And I don't know why you're not doing something, because you plainly can see them, just as I can. I can see all the lawsuits and quarrels that are taking place throughout the nations. He sees 6 problems of social corruption in verse 3 that led to 4 terrible situations in verse 4. He says the law is ignored or paralysed, justice is never applied, for the wicked surrounded the righteous, therefore justice comes out perverted. Since God would not act on the very laws that society was built upon, they were rendered ineffective or paralysed. The law came to be looked at as being without force or authority. And that's what we're seeing, or perceived to see. The law has no power over people today because of the unrighteous judges who would not uphold the law through ignorance or by corrupting it. The law was useless, since the forms of justice or judgment were corrupted, both life and property were insecure. Justice could not prevail because the wicked knew how to utilise it against the righteous in all sides, so that he could not receive his proper due. Miscarriage of justice was the order of the day. Ensnaring the righteous by fraud, The ungodly perverted all right and honesty. And because God did not punish sin immediately, men thought they could get away with it without any consequences. The disintegration of a society into factions and conflict and the breaking down of interest caused each group to desire its own way and reject any authoritative teaching of the law. The wicked appeared to be the victors. Justice never prevailed. It never had a chance because it was not being used the right way. Wow. That's a picture of today's society. But it's happened before. You and I ask the same questions. God, where are you? Why don't you do something? And this is what Habakkuk is saying. I'm perplexed by what I see. I cry out in anguish to you to do something. If you are who you are, step up and do something, God. And the more that he called out for change, guess what happened? Things got worse and worse. Why? And we might be thinking the same thing is happening in our day. I'm sure that we're thinking the same thing today. God, where are you when I need you? Why don't you step in and do something? Why don't you answer me? Why aren't you doing your job? Similar questions. And we're going to see next week. God will answer Habakkuk, but it wasn't the answer that he wanted to hear. And often God gives us an answer, and it's not what we want to hear. I'm sure that Habakkuk thought, yes, God, we prayed to you, you step in, get rid of the king, and everything will be hunky-dory again. And you know what? We can get on with life and live in again. And God said, it's not going to happen. We expect God to do our bidding, to answer our prayers. And when it doesn't turn out that way, we scratch our head and say, why? Why? I'm one of your people. You've promised to look after me. You've promised to protect me. You've promised to meet all my needs. Where are you when I need you? When I'm going through this difficult situation that I have no control over, can I really trust you? Why don't you heal me? Why don't you do this? Why don't you do that? All I ask is that you step in and do something. You and I as Christians, we're here to live, to please God. But to please God, we must first understand who we are and who he is. And he's working all these things out according to his purposes and plans. He's not working them out according to your plans and my plans. He doesn't come down and say, Pastor, what do you think about this? Do you think that would be good for Nari and Matthew? Do you think that would be good for Joan or this one or that one? Do you think I should step in and do something? He doesn't ask us that. He has a purpose and plan for each individual. He knows what we need. We need to be able to trust him in all life circumstances. And that's the difficulty. This is what Habakkuk was facing. 2023, what's it going to be like? Does it have to be better than 2022? We would say, you better be. What if it's worse? What if it's far worse than anything we've ever known before? Will we still trust God? Will we question, say, why God? I'm doing all the right things. How can you let all these bad people, all these lefties, get what they want? And we get nothing. We get persecuted. Will we still trust God? No matter what the situation or the circumstances. So the question this morning is, does God care about you and what happens to you? And the answer is yes. But we have our misconceptions about who God is and what he should do and how he should act. And of course, when God doesn't do what we want and meet our expectations, we chuck a wobbly. We either walk away and say, I'm not having anything to do more with you, God. Like a little child. Chuck a temper tantrum. I won't go to church anymore. I won't read my Bible. I won't pray. I won't give money. I won't do any of that sort of thing if that's the way you're going to treat me. Who do you hurt the most? Yourself. God will still work out his purposes and plans